Hi there, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's APMG webinar. It's Mark Constable here. I'll be your host and moderator, and I'm joined by regular guest presenter Melanie Franklin. Some of you will be familiar with Melanie from previous webinars, no doubt, but for the benefit of those that aren't, Melanie's an experienced practitioner, trainer, and consultant in all things Agile and project program and change management. Alongside running her own training and consultancy business, Agile Change Management Limited, Melanie's also the co-chair for the UK chapter of the Change Management Institute, which is particularly relevant as we're talking all about change today. And it's all about managing change in a world where Agile approaches are increasingly adopted by teams and organisations, and how Agile works, how Agile ways of working impact not just how change is delivered, but how individuals and teams are impacted. Before I hand things over to Melanie, bear with me while I cover a few housekeeping points. So the first of those is the fact that we're recording the session, and everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up email from me later today as soon as we've got that online. You've got an opportunity to submit questions at any time, so you should see an opportunity on your control panel. So feel free to send those in, and we'll try and address as many as we can towards the end. And last but not least, feedback is very valuable to us. So you have my email address from reminder emails and also from the follow-up email. So any feedback is gratefully received. Okay, that's all for me at this stage. So welcome, Melanie, and over to you.
Thanks very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a sort of short and punchy session on why planning is so important in Agile, what the ideal content of the plans are going to be, and the different levels of plan. And we're going to look at the cascade of plans and how we organise the work within them. We all know how to plan. We do it all of the time. So why on earth am I bothering to do a webinar about how to plan change in an Agile world? And one of the things I want to pick out is that I think there are some differences. I think there are sort of three areas of difference that we need to look at. The first is that we need to think about the ideal content of the plan. We need to look at the delivery and the implementation piece. I think we need to think about the fact that we do plan a lot in Agile. I know Agile is an evolving solution, but actually what it means for us in practical terms is that we have to constantly replan. And I want to look at how, therefore, a really simple and and who are much more worried about his usual responsibilities. And what we actually want to do is make sure that we are, really engaging with people so that they can really contribute. And finally, there's a need not only for constantly replanning, but I think staying focused very much on, and are we doing the most relevant thing in our plan at this moment? Now, can I just check, because I'm getting some messages here, that you can all hear me. Mark, can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, we can now, Mel. It just dropped off for 20 seconds or so, 15, 20 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll carry on and hopefully it'll all come together. So what's the first thing I want to talk about is why planning is so important in Agile. And I think this picture here starts to give you a feeling of, things are different in an Agile world. So let's have a look. On the left here, what we've got is this idea of a sort of waterfall approach where we gather the requirements up front and then we use a particular planning technique which looks at how on earth am I going to deliver these as a whole so that I'm actually putting into place a change that is sort of fully pulled together, that all aspects of it are prepared in advance. And of course, what's happening there is that we are often using planning tools like Microsoft Project. We work out what are all the activities, we work out how long they'll take. And what we're doing is we're building up from a sort of a bottom-up approach to identify how long things are going to take. And what happens is that we end up sort of telling the business, well, how much time it's going to take, how much money it's going to take. So we say how long and how much it's going to be. And we're sort of almost doing it to them. Whereas we look on the right-hand side, and what we can see is that we do have to do quite a lot of sort of maybe smaller scale planning, but there's a lot of repetitive planning. Because what we're doing is on the right hand side there, we need a very different conversation to begin with. That different conversation is about what on earth is the big idea? What's the end goal that we're trying to get to? We need to understand their end goal, because in order to have a sort of cascade of plans that take account every wave of change that we're going to be putting in place, we need that orientation of, but that's the end destination. That's what we're trying to get to. That's the big idea. That's the transformation. That's the new way of working that we're aiming for. And then what we're doing is we're pulling off from that. We have to ask ourselves the question, well, what would be the most valuable, the most useful part of that? What would be something that would really help us get going and perhaps prove the concept, perhaps give us something that's useful for the business, that solves a problem for them, or gives them access to something they don't have at the moment, so it enables them to do more than they can currently do. So we have to ask very different questions, because if you like, you can say that in an agile world, the skill set is very different, because the skill set is almost a top-down decomposition skill, where you take the big idea and then you've got to decompose it into the individual components and work out which of those individual components you can do first, and then what would be sensible to do next. One of the things I find when I'm building these agile capabilities across organizations is that this is an area of planning that's actually incredibly difficult to do. It sounds so simple to explain it to you now, but to actually do it and actually ask yourself constantly these questions of, well, okay, but what do we go with first? How will that in its own right add value? So this skill of decomposing into each of the individual ideas, the sorts of things we have to look for, we have to ask ourselves, which of these things from the big idea that we're trying to go for, it is actually standalone, and that we can actually say, yes, now that would work. I'm currently doing some work with a higher education authority, which is talking about its services for students, and it's completely transforming its services for students, because it's a very competitive marketplace now. And what it wants to do is it wants to transform them along digital line. So it's calling itself a sort of digital transformation. It's got a digital strategy, which, if you look under the surface, is very much a case of saying, well, we're going to get rid of lots of manual processes across our university about how we manage the student experience. And what we're going to do is put an awful lot of things online, so that we have one central view of the data, that our students themselves can access that data without having to ask us to find it for them. But also it enables us to allow the students to do an awful lot more sort of self-service. They can find information for themselves rather than us having to provide it to them, which means that we won't have to actually do quite as much servicing of them, and that might free up some more staff. So that's the big idea. We're talking about the things that we're trying to achieve. And the real challenge in that is then looking at that and saying, well, okay, that'll take us a couple of years to get to that ideal picture. But what are the things that we might be able to do right now that would really simplify things? And there's a process in this particular institution which is around allocating accommodation to students for their first year, that has got so many bits of paper and so many different departments that are involved, that what we've said is, well, why don't we build a small accommodation portal? It's part of this much bigger picture, but what we know is that it would actually enable students to apply for accommodation without filling in lots of forms and coming to the campus to fill those forms in. They can fill them in from wherever they are in the world months before they arrive, and that we can actually track the application, a bit like when you order a Domino's pizza, and you can see whether or not it's just they've received your order, and whether it's gone into the oven, and now whether it's out for delivery. So we've identified something, and then we realise that when we get that underway, can we then go and sort of replicate a lot of those benefits for a slightly different service? For example, when we're asking students to elect what subjects they are going to study in their second year when they have an element of choice, well, maybe we could start putting that online, for example. So I think the planning skill, as I said, is that idea of what's the bigger picture, and then how do you do that decomposition? How do you think about what are all the key elements that go to make up that fantastic, desirable future state? And what we're doing is not working out all the activities that we need to do to achieve that. We are doing something completely different, staying at a much higher level and going, okay, but which of those ideas are we going to select first? And then what we're going to do is a mini plan around those. So I do notice the difference between that bottom-up planning, which actually gives you a sense of control, because you can really enjoy the fact you're working out every single activity that you need to get to do every aspect of the change. And it can be very complex, and the plan can be absolutely huge, and it can take several months to pull it together. But the fact is that it does give you an illusion of control. One of my clients has said that where they found moving to a more agile change environment, they worry that their senior executives are used to getting plans similar to the left-hand side with every single activity identified up front, and a feeling that therefore there's complete control. The team know exactly what they're doing because they're able to lay out a detailed plan over the next couple of years. Now, we all know, don't we, that the further out you go, the bigger the lie you tell. But when you put together that detailed plan initially, it looks really great. It looks like you've got everything sorted out and everything under control. Whereas the right-hand side looks like you've got some big ticket items in there, you've got some big ideas, but where's the control there? Where's the detailed planning underneath it? So we've got this issue of it being the decomposition being a completely different skill set, but also the perception for those people who are our customers within the business, that perhaps we're being a bit loose, and we're a bit high level, and that we haven't really got control of the detail of our work. And that's one of the things I think that we need to think about with Agile, is that what we're going to do is we are going to create that level of detail. We do understand what it is we're doing, but we are going to do it piece by piece. And I am not going to lay you out a detailed plan over the next couple of years, because if I do that, there's a very good chance that what I plan now for the late 2020s is going to actually be nonsensical, because things will have changed in January, February of next year that would affect the work I'd already planned for November, December of that year. So why waste my time? So there are some different skills and some different perspectives if we're going to be effective at Agile planning that I wanted to get out there. And decomposition is the thing I'm going to be talking about. How do we break down the big idea? The second thing that I think is really important, and why it's worth talking about planning skills when we're talking about Agile environments, is that one of the greatest difficulties with Agile, and one of its greatest criticisms from within the business, is that the time taken to create the technical, tangible changes, for example, building that accommodation portal, technically it's a difficult piece of work, but it's not impossible. And over the next few months, people will gather together an idea of what all the information is needed, and they'll think about how they're going to code that portal so that it's a working app that looks really great. And those project activities, though, are going to be a lot easier to plan and manage and define than the right-hand side of this picture, which is all the behavioural changes that are going to be needed by lots of different people who are affected by this app. So the obvious place to start is thinking about the accommodation unit, and how at the moment what they have is they have people who man the reception desk, who are used to helping guide students through a paper application form, that there are people within that office whose job it is to type in the information from that paper application form, that they actually store that paper, and that they have therefore they have a big filing area in the back of their office, and that they have to regularly archive that paper year on year, and they keep it for a few years. Well, if we're getting rid of paper in its simplest form, you can already start to see that there will be lots of changes to those people's jobs. You can already imagine that they will need training of some kind on the system that we're putting in place. They'll need to understand it and how it works. And they'll probably want to learn new skills around pulling off reports and understanding what's actually been happening from the student side, because they're not seeing the students now. It's all being done sort of remotely by the students. So lots of changes in their work. And that's going to go through the typical change curve of people struggling to understand, why does my world need to change? Being unhappy about their world of work changing because they're losing all that familiarity and that confidence they have in how they have to do their job. They have to take time out to be trained on a new system and then work out for themselves what the impact is on their job and how they're going to do their job next. And as I talk about that, you can already start to get a feeling that perhaps all of those transition activities take a lot more time, because they are mental processes and they are emotional processes about being willing to change, being willing to have a go and maybe make mistakes to start with, being willing to keep practicing with the new portal until it's become second nature again. And all of that is time taken up that people need to absorb. And so one of the most important things when we are rolling out constant waves of change, because the accommodation piece will do a little bit on applying for your first house, but what about all of those queries? Let's put the next piece of the portal together, which is if a student has a problem with their accommodation, like the sink is blocked, that they can use the portal for letting facilities management know about that. So there's going to be lots of these waves of change coming, and lots of people having to get used to how their world of work is changing. And all of that emotional effect has to be taken into account alongside the technical work. So what we need to do is make sure in our Agile plans that wherever possible, we're bringing these two worlds together. So if I've got people who are developing for me the portal, then at the same time, I want to make sure that we're also putting in place, I'm trying to bring these two worlds together. On this slide, I've shown them as two separate things. But of course, what I want to do is merge them so that at the same time we're doing the project activities, we're doing as much getting used to the new ways of working activities as we possibly can, so that we don't get out of step. What I see in Agile worlds all the time is that the technical, tangible work goes much faster, and we end up with a backlog, not the product backlog that we talk about in Agile, but a real backlog of achievements that we've got that haven't gone into use yet, because people are still trying to process emotionally and psychologically their new way of working from the last few changes that we implemented. So I do think in our plans, we've always got to keep an eye out for how much of this can we keep in sync, so we don't end up having lots of things that people aren't using yet because they're not ready to use them. So we need to work on bringing those two worlds together. And that certainly changes the content of plans. An awful lot of organisations are talking about how they are having these, what are often referred to as integrated project plans now. They're integrated with the change plans. So they've got both the delivery or project activities along with the behavioural or change activities that are actually in place there. So in terms of our planning, we need to be aware of that, because that starts to give you a feeling of maybe what I need to do is collaborate, therefore, that any planning activity we do isn't just with those people that are going to build, in this example, the portal, but they are also there with the people from the accommodation unit who will identify all of the changes that they need to make and all of the work that they need to do at the same time. So if we accept that concept, then what we've got to recognise is in any sort of wave of change that we're planning, any initiative that we've got to have both the delivery and the implementation. And it's all of those tasks taken together that give us the new ways of working. So bearing in mind that I've got, shall we say, non-planning professionals, and I've got my project professionals together in one sort of unit, what I want is a very simple intuitive and repeatable planning structure. And that's what I'm putting in front of you right now. Now, you might not like the language. You can always change this to, I mean, after all, if we were from a Prince2 world, we'd probably call these iterations stages. If we were from a managing successful programs world, we call them tranches. And if we're from an Agile PM world, we might call them increments. But the key thing is that there are some, if you like, waves of change here. The first iteration should always be the same. Whatever change you are running, however big, however small, that there must be, at the end of iteration 1, agreement on how the change will be managed. And again, this is collaborative. I want you to bring together those who create the tangible change and those who are going to experience the change, and make sure they're all on the same page about how work's going to be done, when people are going to work together, how work is going to be prioritized, how work is going to be tested, what the requirements are before something is decided that it can actually go live. And it's just, and how we're going to communicate with our stakeholders, and maybe what's the underlying sort of business case that drives all of this. So we might have to bring people together very early on to spend some days working out on that. But let's assume, for the purposes of planning, that goes well. So we ought to have some planning in place to identify what all of those activities are. But then what we do is we move through this idea of, so iteration 2 delivers us a new way of working, for example, on how students apply for their first accommodation for their first year of study. Iteration 3 would then be another new way of working that builds on the approach at the end of iteration 2. So, for example, having got details of all of the university's accommodation into the portal, that's being used in iteration at the end of iteration 2 for students to book their accommodation. But at the end of iteration 3, a lot of the same information is being used to extend that service into, and if you're already living in one of our units of accommodation, this is how you let us know if there's anything wrong, like there's a cracked window or a blocked sink. And then in iteration 4, we go on and yet again start to use that service and that information to extend the service out to students. So at that point, we might decide we don't want to do anything else on accommodation, but now we do want to move into booking of the modules that they want to take for the next year. So now we're moving it into sort of academic services. So now we need to, we've got these sort of the opening screens for students to access the portal, but now we need to build another section of the portal, and it affects a different part of the university. So that will be iteration 4. So it's a case of identifying, this goes back to this idea of having the bigger picture, which is this complete sort of transformation, this digital journey, this digital access that all students will have, the reduction of manual processing within the university, the reduction of paperwork, a single source of all the data. That's our big picture. As you can see here, what we're doing with these different iterations is saying, okay, well, iteration 2 is one of our ideas, and then iteration 3 is one of our next ideas, and then iteration 4, another idea. So we keep this idea of the decomposition going, that we're showing that actually all we want you to do in your first level of planning is to identify what are the big pieces of work that we have to do, and have we got those in the right order? Have we got those in the most valuable order, the order that will make the most difference to the university and give us the greatest and the earliest return on investment? So our planning is very much at the high level. We're not going to bother getting into the detailed planning of iteration 2 until we're absolutely sure that we've got some kind of idea of that those iterations, the outcomes in those iterations are the right ones. So that's where we need to get to first of all. Now, why is that different to the planning that we do? Well, it's different. If I just go back to the bottom-up planning on the left here, we didn't have to do that before. It was a whole different skill set, because we knew that we had one go live that we were heading towards, which was the full service. So I didn't have to keep making decisions about which bit of the service should we go live with first. as I didn't. I only went live once at the very end. So I had the freedom to come up with all of the activities and how they knitted together in the most logical flow possible. Whereas, as you can see on the right-hand side here, I've got a completely different job to do now. I have to work out the order of the ideas that I'm going to go live with, and that those ideas are going to be based on what's going to give us the best return on investment. The other thing that you're probably starting to see is if I'm going to do that, unlike the left-hand side where there's perhaps a very logical flow and I can manage all of the interdependencies and give myself the shortest possible route to that ultimate go live, what I've probably got is I've probably got lots of sort of interruptions in that I'll do a piece of work, it might be standalone, but then I might have to go and tweak that original piece of work to add on more functionality to it in the next iteration. So there's something around Agile being a sort of series of steps, yes, but sometimes to take step 3, I need to go back and tweak a little bit of step 2. To take step 4, I need to go back and tweak a little bit of step 3. So sometimes there are inbuilt sort of diseconomies of scale along with Agile. I can accept those because I'm getting an early return on investment. I'm not having to wait the full duration to get the benefits of one single go live at the end. But it is worth keeping in mind that it's more of a jerky sort of route to success in Agile. It's not as smooth as it might have been in the more traditional waterfall approaches. Hope I'm making sense so far. Have we had any questions, Mark, that I need to be aware of?
No, not at this stage, Val. Yeah, pretty clear. There's just a couple of questions about the slides, which I can cover at the end.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll carry on then. So we've got this delivery and implementation taken together, gives us the new way of working. And what we've got to do is this high-level planning of working out what are the first new ways of working we put in place, and then what's next, and then what's next. One of the other things that's absolutely vital in Agile is that we talk about the fact that what drives us, the engine that powers an Agile approach, is we're saying as early as possible, we're going to go live with something so that the business gets the benefits of it. The business can perhaps get this streamlined process up and running so it can allow staff to get on with other things. So it increases productivity within their unit, or it enables the unit to stop doing things that it no longer really needs to do, so that saves them some cost, for example. So we're very interested in picking the right thing to go live with first of all, that gives us the earliest possible return on investment. But it also means that there's very much a skill. We've talked about decomposition. We're decomposing the actual pieces of work. The other thing we've got to decompose is the total timeline. So I might be saying to all the pro-vice chancellors at a university that over the next 2 years, I can definitely give you this digital transformation. But what I've also got to think about is how I'm going to decompose those 2 years against these different iterations. How long do I need to spend covering a little bit of getting started and iteration 2? How long do I need to spend with iteration 3, iteration 4, iteration 5, etc.? So I'm starting to always think about how many weeks are we dedicating to the various iterations so that I can be clear to the business that are impacted. This is when you can expect to see this change. And this is when you can expect to see that things will start to improve around here. So, and that's very important when we're bringing together the world of delivery and transition, or getting ready for the new ways of working. Because if you're sort of starting to tell students, oh, you'll be able to access this portal from this date, and we're stopping paper application forms for accommodation from this date, then we better make sure that we actually deliver on that date, because what we've done is it's not just when something's ready, but we're saying when we're going to start behaving differently, and when people can actually get access to new things and stop doing old things. So time becomes something. It's not just in Agile, I think, the fact that we're saying on a given date something will go live so that you can get return on investment. That's for those who authorize our projects. But what I'm very conscious of is that I need to be very good at decomposing the time and sticking to that time frame, because that's when people are going to be expecting the new service and the new ways of working. And that's what we would have geared them up towards. We would have trained them for that. We would have told them this is when you need to start working differently. And I want to honour my promises, because change is always stressful. And if at the last minute you have to keep going back and saying, oh, I'm sorry, we're not ready, that causes that feeling of a lack of confidence, and people had put all their energy into being ready for a certain day, and then, oh, they're told it's not going to happen for another couple of weeks. And we don't need that extra layer of emotional upset when already within a world of change, we've got enough problems going on. So hitting the deadlines is pretty important. So how do we do it? So let's turn our attention to the technicalities of how we achieve it. And as I said, we're going to keep on this idea of very intuitive, very simple structure. So as you can see here, the time frame runs along the top. Then what you've seen is we've got these different iterations, which is, if you say you want to call them stages or tranches or increments, that's fine. And what we've identified is our big idea, the outcome of each of those iterations. And then in order to make sure that I'm going to hit that milestone, that the outcome is going to occur on the time frame we said it would, what I've got is a very simple, repeatable process, 3 steps in the process under each iteration. They might take different times, but they're all there. So let's have a look. The first box is getting started. Getting started is doing things there where we're actually going to prepare our information. Then we'll do making progress, where we actually get stuff done. And then we start to get ready to put it into live use and transfer it to be the new ways of working. So, and then that enables us to achieve our milestone. So you don't have to be a planning expert, you don't need to be an agile expert, you don't need to be a change expert for this kind of planning approach to go to feel, yeah, I get this, this is simple, this is really easy stuff. And that's the point. We're going to be collaborating with people from all parts of the business. We don't want to set up our world as, oh, you have to be a real specialist to take part in change management. You have to be a real specialist to work on any kind of agile initiative. That's absolutely what we want to avoid. We want to be as inclusive as we possibly can. So let's give people this simple, intuitive structure then. So we want to hit the time frame. So we're going to use very much an agile concept, which is saying, okay, knowing that with any iteration, we've got to get started, make some progress and realize the benefits. Well, making progress, getting stuff done is probably where we're going to spend most of our time. But let's allocate a little bit of time at the front for how we get started, and a little bit of time at the back for realizing benefits. So if we give ourselves sort of a month to get something done, a month is 4 weeks, that's 20 working days. So what we might want to do is spend 2 or 3 days at the beginning of that month organising how we're going to work together, working out what the scope of that work is. I'll show you that in just a moment. And then the bulk of those 4 weeks, a good sort of 15 days or so, is going to be dedicated possibly to making the progress, getting stuff done. So maybe 12 to 15 days is on that. And then we leave a few days towards the end for doing the activities that help us realise the benefits. So again, nice, simple language that is accessible to everybody. You don't have to be a planning expert to understand the basics of getting started, making progress and realising benefits. And so we repeat this structure, and we repeat this structure for every single iteration. But what we're going to do is we say, right, the discover piece is a very collaborative time to say, well, where are all the areas that we need to change? What do we need to change? What are all our ideas? So in other words, brainstorming all the pieces of work, all the activities that we need to do. Now, if people come from an agile world, they might write these up as user stories. If people come from a more traditional project management world, they might write them up as requirements. And if people come from the business, and they just might write them up as a to-do list. Doesn't matter. What we've done is we've just had a collaborative activity, a brainstorming activity together, so that everybody's on the same page. The key thing is that in this discovery of what work we need to do, we're making sure that it's both the delivery and the transition, the new ways of working, the change management activities that are included together. And I see how important this is, because it's an eye-opener when you first start doing this collaborative planning, because the project team who can identify all of the technical pieces of work that they need to do, they can brainstorm through that. But what they are hearing from the business is, if you like, the effect of their work, that actually they might have coded this feature on the app, but the impact of that is that this group over here have to send a notification to another department that this is how they're going to be working from now on. And this is where they can get the data. They have to tell the front desk staff that they're no longer going to have paper templates. They have to put up posters, and they have to send out emails to all the students to let them know this is the new process for how you look after, book your accommodation. They have to let the students' union know that this is how we're now going to be treating students. So it's an eye-opener for the project to hear of all the things that need to be put together in the business and just how much work's involved. But it's also a great learning opportunity for those in the business to understand how this new way of working is actually technically being put together, and what are all the tasks involved in that, so they can appreciate all the hard work that's going on almost behind the scenes. So bringing them together in this sort of joint discovery piece means that no pieces of work are forgotten. And so when we come to the next step here of planning, and we're trying to prioritise how things work, real life examples of what might change are that there might be a sensible way of doing the technical work about what we code first, what we code next. But in this collaborative environment, the project team have can see that something that they were planning to do later on in the iteration actually has quite a big effect on the business, in this case the accommodation unit, and is actually going to take quite a long time for the accommodation unit to get resolved. So they start to realise that maybe if they brought that forward into their plan, if they did that earlier, it would give the accommodation unit the time they need, that longer lead time that they actually need. And that seems to make sense. So I think it's a case of sort of trying to say, you know, when we're planning how we're going to get the work done, again, we're continuing this collaborative activity of how we prioritize the work, how we schedule perhaps the sprints or time boxes that we're using. We might work on a 4-week or a 2-week sprint, and then be another one after that and another one after that. And so it's an opportunity for everybody involved to understand how time's going to be allocated, and what's the best possible way of doing the work. So very simple. If I just go back to this for a moment, you get the picture. There's getting started. We spent a bit of time on that. So everybody's brainstormed all of the work. So we've got the full scope of work for this iteration. That makes us feel confident. We haven't missed anything out. So we understand we've got the full scope of work. So we're pretty certain we're going to meet that outcome at the end of the iteration. So having done discover and plan, the next job is actually to get in and actually make some progress and actually get stuff done. So of course, what we're doing here is we are creating all the changes in working practices. That's the technical changes that enable us to do things in a more automated digital way, but also all of the changes back into the workspace that enable us to prepare the groundwork and enable the staff in the accommodation unit and the students to work differently. And of course, for every single piece of work that we do, we want to go through this cycle of making sure that we do it and we test it. So there'll be a review. Some of it might be technically tested with test scripts, but sometimes there'll be a walkthrough of a new business process so that everybody understands how a job now works. There might be lots of post-it notes up on the wall of all the individual steps of a new process. So we'll make sure that they all hang together. So, and this is a constant cycle. You change and review a particular piece of work, then you change and review the next piece of work, and then the next, and then the next. So we might be going through that cycle for quite a few days, where we get an awful lot of the requirements or user stories or the to-do list actually achieved. And that's where the heart of our action lies. And then lastly, we recognise that there are two parts to sort of going live. We deploy what we've got, but we also try to encourage, particularly in this case, the accommodation unit, to dismantle. In other words, to remove things that they no longer need. So, for example, because I've been through this recently, one of the things that we needed to do was to actually cancel the standing arrangement with the print unit, who every month produced a whole box load of templates, document templates for students to fill in to say they want a particular house, or they want a particular bedroom in a particular block on a particular campus. So every month that was a standing order with a print unit. And it's just remembering to say, we need to cancel that because we're not using those forms anymore. Because otherwise the box arrives, you think, oh, what a waste of paper, what a waste of trees. So whatever changes we're putting in place, not only do we want them to make them available for use and to support people as they start working in that new way, but we should also have some good housekeeping procedures in place where we make sure that we tidy up and dismantle anything that we no longer need. And of course, wouldn't it be great if we create a very encouraging environment, thanking people for all the effort they're making, and also being very alert, being ready to identify any improvements, any upsides that we're seeing. So from this live example I'm using, one of the things that we did was we made sure that everybody was aware when we got an email from a student who was based in Malaysia thanking us for the fact that they were able to book their accommodation online now, because they had been worried that they were going to have to book an extra flight and come over much earlier to be able to make sure that they didn't miss out. And so they were thrilled that they'd been able to stay with their family a little bit longer before they flew into the country to start their degree course. And we made sure that that thank you from the student was shared with everybody who'd been involved, and they can see that there was genuine sort of a customer service benefit that actually we were delivering. We could see also that there was some efficiency benefits, and people felt that they were no longer doing sort of a pushing paper job and were able to get on with more valuable things. When they were, you know, nobody's lost their job over this, and they're under tremendous pressure to do lots of things in the accommodation unit. But the fact is that they've also got that customer service benefit from that great email from the student. So we made sure that that went viral, if you like, and made sure that we were celebrating that. So hopefully you can start to see that, you know, if we're going to go down this collaborative planning route, a really simple structure that we repeat for every single iteration. You know, it's not special to one iteration, it's something we repeat for everything. And I alluded to this at the start, but certainly when we are going through the discovery of all the work we need to do, the planning bit is we have to agree the priority of ideas. And again, it's just a case of what didn't we do in maybe a waterfall approach. So forgive me, I'm just going to go back to the waterfall approach for a moment and just look and say that my priority in the waterfall approach on the left there was to make sure that I identified every single piece of work, and I didn't need to think too much about how to prioritize it, because the prioritization rule was, okay, well, what do you need to do first to enable you to do the next thing that enables you to do the next thing? So how I organised the work was always based on this principle of the logical flow and what was the dependency from one thing to the next. So lining up things all based on interdependencies really is how you're going to plan in this way. What we've got to do in this more agile world is our planning. We can never disassociate our planning from our ability to prioritise. And frankly, our ability to prioritise is about a skill of how we take decisions. So we've got to decide at the very high level which ideas we're going for. So in other words, which outcome do we want from iteration 2? What comes first? Then what would be done next for iteration 3? And what would be done next for iteration 4? That's the first thing that we have to do. We have to plan at that level. And then what we can see is that having got that plan, we need to obviously be able to plan when we are in getting started. Yeah, we need to agree the priority of ideas within that particular iteration. And if we then further break those iterations down into individual boxes of time or sprints, then we would also prioritize there. So The other thing that I wanted to draw our attention to is just how important it is to have a really simple and easy to understand idea of how to prioritize something and make decisions around something that is essential, something that we really want but we can live without if we have to, and things that we'd love to include and we will if we've got the time, but they are not going to be the first on our list. So it's really simple. The first on our list is anything that's essential. Then the things that we'd really like to include because we think that they do have links to the benefits. But if we have to, we'll live without them because we could still do things with a bit of a workaround. But we'd really like to include them. And then there's the nice to haves, if you like. And of course, when we're brainstorming all the work, if we think that we've had some great ideas, but maybe they're not as essential, maybe we'll put them in the won't have this time column. But this, often called Moscow prioritization, is a very simple way of doing it. And it doesn't matter what criteria you're using. The important thing is that everybody is going to use the same criteria so that everybody can take part in sharing their views about what comes first, what comes next, what should we be doing. So I started this by saying, well, why on earth do we need a webinar on planning agile approaches? And I was picking out that these things here, which is that we know that we need to have both types of work, delivery and implementation, that we know that we need to have something that's simple and intuitive because we have to keep replanning. As we get to the end of every iteration, we need to plan the next one. And as we get to as we get towards the end of maybe each time box or sprint within those iterations, we need to plan the next one, so that we know that there's a lot of a sort of replanning going on. But the other thing we needed to talk about is that we need to have this idea of prioritization so that we can always focus on, well, are we doing the most valuable thing that we should be doing at this point in time? So have we got the order of the work right? And in order to be able to do this, we need something simple like the Moscow, that piece in there. So the key things I want us to take away from this webinar, because we all know how to plan, is that actually the skill set is a bit different if you're going to be effective in Agile. And one of those things is that we're really good at decomposing the big idea into chunks. And we can do that using this prioritization method. That we've got a simple, intuitive structure so that we can collaborate with anyone and everyone that's impacted. And finally, we need that collaboration because actually, if we're going to make sure that we are really realizing benefits at the end of each iteration, we need to make sure that the work has included both the technical delivery of something, the tangible delivery of a particular change, alongside all of the activities needed to make it ready to go into use. So those are the three areas, and for me, the three big differences that we need to really focus on when we're looking at planning an agile change environment. So on that basis, Mark, hopefully you've been able to hear me. You'll be able to ask me some questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no further audio problems, so that was good. So first question, please could you let me know how we can apply Agile principles in event planning? We have one product to deliver by a set date, so can Agile work?
Wow, yes, very specific question. I do a lot of event planning myself, and I think there is a cascade. I'm going to go back to an earlier slide, if you don't mind, because it always gives me, I'm just going to go back to the big idea one. So let's say that we've got this big event. I'm going to have to make it up, which is a big event where we want to bring an awful lot of people from all sorts of levels in the organization together. So maybe every country is represented and every management grade. There's one person from every level in the company. So maybe 500 people are getting together in a hotel in Barcelona, let's say. So we know the big idea, and what we know that's the general idea, and the big idea there is that because this is all about how we define the strategic objectives of our organization going forward, let's say. So we know that's the big idea, that's the big, but it's one big event. And you could argue that because we know there's that one big event there, shouldn't we be using the left-hand side? Would it not be better to think about all of the pieces of work and all of the interdependencies and use that sort of more traditional sort of waterfall approach? But I do think that you can use Agile for this, because I think what happens is that you think about, well, actually, what are the key, almost the key agenda items? And what you can do is you can divide up your event into the sort of the key achievements, the key outcomes we've got to have. So it might be that the first big idea is to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what is the big desirable strategy for the organization. So you'd make sure that you'd sorted out all of the speakers, all of the materials, but also all of the activities that you wanted your audience to do to engage with what that strategy was, for example. You then might take the next agenda item, which is that maybe having got everybody on the same page about the strategy, you'd want them to be using it to develop their own a product development schedule of things that the company is going to deliver over to its customers over the next few years. So again, you'd look at, have we got all the speakers in place and all the materials in place and all the activities in place that we're going to run to make sure that that element of the event is actually in place. So I think you can always take whatever the big idea is, and you can sort of say, do you know what, we can work out, let's focus on just grouping this work together that's got some similarity. And actually, if, by the way, we were then told halfway through our planning that this can't be a 4-day event, it can only be a 3-day event, we're going, well, that's okay. We've done the strategy piece, we've done the new product development schedule, and we've done the third piece, which is everybody's had an involvement in what our location plan should be, because we want to expand internationally. But what we're not going to get to is what we think our new leadership development program should look like, because we've lost a day of our event. So that's all right. That was our last iteration anyway. And we put it as the last iteration because we thought it was the least valuable thing that we could use all these people coming together to do. So hopefully you see my idea here is you take whatever the purpose of your event is, and you start to say, okay, in order to achieve that fantastic feeling that we've answered all of our questions about our organization, but which are the most important questions to answer? So in iteration 1, it might be about strategy. In iteration 2, it might be about the impact on products. Hopefully I've made sense, but we'll find out from the person who asked the question later.
Thanks, Phil. At the proposal stage, how do you compete with a waterfall approach that can offer a bottom line cost for their end-to-end plan compared to Agile?
Okay, we still do that. These 2 blue boxes on this slide, but what happens is it's where that information comes from. That's what's really changed. So if I'm doing a waterfall approach, what I can do is I work bottom up to be able to add up for you these are all the activities. So this is how long it's going to take, and this is how many people I need to do it, and this therefore is how much it's going to cost. So it's very much though we're in the position of telling people this is what it's going to cost. In Agile, we completely turn that on its head. So before I write the proposal, what I'm doing is going to the business and I am saying, okay, now I'm going to use an example that was actually in the papers yesterday, which was Sainsbury's supermarket here in the United Kingdom, who had been thinking about rolling out an idea, which was that we could scan on our phones the products that we buy from the supermarket, and it would take the money straight away from Apple Pay or PayPal, and we wouldn't have to queue up at any tills. And so that's an idea, that's our big idea that we would roll out across all of our stores. Okay, so if I want to bring together a proposal of what that work's going to involve, whatever, what I need to do is I'm going to go and say to the business, how valuable do you think this idea is? How much extra revenue do you think it will bring in? How much cost do you think it will save? And really make them think about the business value of that particular idea. And then you say, well, what are we going to spend? 30% of that anticipated revenue on actually making it happen? 25%? So in other words, you have to go to a completely different set of questions, which is start with the total business value. What do you think you're going to get out of it? And then agree what proportion of that business value do we want to spend on making it a reality? And that's where your constraint comes in. So I haven't worked bottom up and added everything together and said, hey, this is what the answer is. I've done the opposite. I've gone to the business and said, what do you want the answer to be? Because I can deliver you a scan your goods on your phone. I can deliver you one with all the bells and whistles on and spend an absolute fortune on it if you're going to give me that much money. But if you're telling me I've got to turn this around in 6 months, then I'm going to give you a very basic service, but I can still give it to you. Yeah, but I'm going to work within the constraints that you set me. How much money have I got and how long have I got to deliver it? So you've always in the proposal stage, you're still going to have to answer those questions, but it's how you answer them. Do you work it bottom up and add it all together, or do you go to the heart of the situation, which says, how valuable is this solution to you and how much do you want to pay to actually achieve it?
Great, thanks, Val. There's two questions, both about identifying the right number of time boxes, sprints, or iterations. So, yeah, one says, how do we avoid the risk of breaking down an idea into too many small ideas? Yeah, and then they both ask, how do we identify the ideal number?
Okay, there is no ideal number. The thing that but I'm going to give you a few hints. I'm just going back through the slides to look at things for myself, which is if we look at this one on the right hand side to start with, on the ideal number, and not having too many little pieces as well, is I think you want to ask yourself, and I think a lot of ops directors who are affected by change going into their area of the business would certainly endorse everything I'm about to say, which is, how many times do you want to disrupt the business? Yeah, so that gives you a starting idea. I think you should always think about any blackout periods in your business, where it might be that if you happen to be in car sales in the UK, March and sort of September are your busiest periods. So you know that you're not going to be putting any change in place probably from mid-February to mid-April, from mid-August to mid-October. So already that's taken 4 months out of the year. So you think, well, okay, when else can I squeeze change in, and how many changes do I want to put in? And I think so again, it's looking at the top level and breaking it down on that kind of logical basis. But I'm also at the other end of the scale being pushed towards it by saying, well, how quickly do you want to get some fix in place? So I think I think it's always worth having your sort of checklist of questions you want to ask. And also thinking about, well, yeah, okay, I could decompose. Think about the decomposition of your big idea, like a product breakdown structure, where you break it down, then you break it down, and then you break it down. And you know that you can go to quite a micro level if you want to, but just have a look at that and go, but if we go to really little changes and we keep putting those into the business, they have to keep gearing up for announcing change and telling people how their jobs are going to change. How many times do they reasonably want to do that on top of everything else? So maybe that's when you start to think, yeah, okay, maybe we'll put change into the business maybe every 6 weeks to 2 months, but let's not do it every single fortnight. So what I'm saying is, it's almost like there's an algorithm based on the factors of how many times you want to disrupt the business, how early you need to get return on investment, how you can group the work together that would make sense for you.
Great, thanks, Val. We're close to our hour, so there's one more question. The approach discussed here is common sense and should be practiced by all organisations for all change initiatives. The question is therefore, why do we still have problems, and what techniques will be useful to overcome them?
I don't know if you're going to like this answer, but my experience tells me this, and I'm going to stay on this slide because this is where the heart of the problem lies. You're absolutely right. I'm hoping I've laid out something so intuitive and so simple, we're all thinking, yeah, that's what we should do. But the blockage, I think, tends to come from the fact that as a project manager of so many years standing, there is an expectation that I will have worked out what all the activities are on the left-hand side, and I can come to you with my professional opinion of, right, these are all things we need to do, so this is how long it's going to take, and this is how much it's going to cost. And that enables the business to sort of, not have to do the difficult thinking, which I've just been describing, which is they've had a great idea, yeah, but now I'm asking them to cost it. And I'm asking them to really answer the question. You need to work out exactly what you think the difference is going to be. What is the impact of all these benefits? What are all these benefits? And you know as well as I do, too often what we do is we start with what and we end up with the why, because it's given us some of these benefits. Agile forces you can't do this kind of planning here You can't do this kind of planning here. You can't allocate the outcomes and the milestones, and you can't allocate the time unless you've got that constraint up front, which says the business is saying, look, this new idea, let's take drones are in the news this morning. Let's say that we are an insurance company that's come up with a whole new policy for drone insurance for those who are affected by drones and those who fly drones as hobbies. And thinking, well, okay, that's a new market segment. Let's put all the processes, let's put this change in place. Let's add this to our product range. And you think, well, okay, let's do that. But how many customers do you think there are? How much are they prepared to pay, do you think, for this kind of proposal? And therefore, how much revenue do you think you're going to get every year? And therefore, how much money of that revenue are you going to give me to get this idea underway? And I think there is something innately in the heart of that, which is I'm asking you to do the hard thinking up front, whereas maybe too much in project management, what we've done is we've looked after our customers by saying, hey, I've worked out all the work involved and this is what you're going to have to pay. So my experience tells me that that's where the heart of the problem lies.
Okay, thanks very much, Mel. We better start wrapping up there. So as I mentioned towards the start, we'll be sending a follow-up email as soon as we've got the recording and slides online. So look out for that email in the next couple of hours or so. Be some useful links, and we'll also include a link to a supporting paper that Mel's put together as well. So as we do close, I just want to highlight a couple of our most popular courses and certifications for those involved in Agile and change. So you can see we've got Agile PM at the right, on the right there. That's based on the Agile PM handbook from the Agile Business Consortium, and Change Management on the left, which is very much linked to and aligned to the Change Management Institute's Change Management Body of Knowledge. And what you'll also see there is a logo for our new Agile Change Specialist course and certification, which we'll be launching towards the end of the month. And as lead architect of the course, we've had to say a few words about it, Mel.
Yeah, I've been piloting this course in a very agile way throughout this year, and it's very much a practical course. So some of the things we've been talking about today, as part of this course, you would be involved in taking initiatives and doing that decomposition that I talked about, and working out how these plans would actually flow, and having plenty of opportunity to apply ideas of Moscow prioritization. But some of the other things we also do on that course is we do a lot on what are the questions we ask the business to identify business value? What are the techniques we can use to help identify all the different benefits and how they fit together? Because we've got courses that tell us how important it is to identify the benefits, but I wanted to make sure we had lots of training on the practical activities of how we discover them. And then we've also got within that course the opportunity to look at how do we build effective relationships and rapport with those, because we've just talked about the importance of collaborating between project teams and the business. So what are the skills needed to build the most effective relationships and the best possible working environment to help that? And this course has got lots of practical activities. So it's very much doing. 80% of the course is doing, 20% of it is having a look at some of the slides.
Fab, thanks Mel. And I think that's everything, so wrap up there. So thanks very much everyone for attending. I do hope you found it useful and informative, and many thanks as ever to Melanie for your insights and expertise today. So thanks again everyone, enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Bye-bye.
Bye.